The city of Brassatine awoke every morning to the hum of gears and the hiss of steam. It was a place where the sky was threaded with airship lanes and rooftops sprouted brass pipes like weeds. At its heart, the great clock tower loomed, its face gleaming gold even in the dim dawn light, its chimes so steady they were said to guide the heartbeat of the entire city. But on this morning, Ivonne woke not to the warm chimes of the tower, but to a silence so sharp it made her sit bolt upright in her bed. The workshop was never silent. Even when her father, Voran the clockmaker, slept in his chair, the gentle tick-tick of hundreds of clocks filled the air like a comforting lullaby. But now, the stillness pressed on her ears like the weight of deep water. She threw on her leather apron, the one stained with oil smudges from years of helping her father repair pocket watches and carriage timers, and padded barefoot to the workshop floor. Her breath caught. The rows of clocks, pendulum, carriage, mantle, cuckoo, all stood still. Their hands were frozen at different times, as though each had stopped mid-breath. The air smelled faintly of smoke and hot metal, though no fire burned. On the main workbench lay a single object, her father's golden pocket watch. It was unlike any she had seen before, its casing etched with spirals that seemed to move when she stared too long. A faint, frantic ticking came from within, but the hands on its face spun wildly, blurring into a circle of gold and ivory before suddenly snapping still, at midnight. Ivonne. The voice was so faint she thought at first she'd imagined it. She spun around, expecting her father to emerge from the back room with a half-smile and an explanation. But the doorway was empty. Ivonne, find the missing gear, before the last chime. The whisper came from nowhere, and everywhere, like the hum of a clock hidden inside her own chest. Her hands trembled as she reached for the watch. The moment her fingers brushed the warm metal, a sharp pulse ran up her arm, and the ticking grew louder. "Father," she called, her voice cracking. No answer. Something else caught her eye. On the bench beside the watch lay a small scrap of parchment, stained with oil. It was her father's handwriting, jagged and rushed. "Greater than if I am not back by the Great Gear Festival, keep the watch safe. Trust no one." Her heart pounded. The festival was tomorrow, the grandest day in Brassatine, when the great clock tower would chime 13 times at midnight to mark the city's founding. It was a tradition older than anyone living, and the thought of her father missing it was unthinkable. She looked once more at the frozen workshop. Outside the windows, the early morning fog swirled through the gas-lamp-lit streets. Somewhere, far above, the great clock tower began to chime the hour, but Ivonne's breath caught when she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a strange pause, followed by a hollow, impossible 13. The sound echoed through the city, deep and wrong, as though time itself had slipped. The golden pocket watch ticked faster. Ivonne knew then that her father was in trouble, and that whatever had happened was far bigger than her family's small workshop. She tightened the strap of her satchel, slid the pocket watch inside, and stepped out into the fog-choked streets. Somewhere in Brassatine, the answers waited. But the watch in her pocket felt heavier than brass, as though it carried not just metal and gears, but the weight of hours themselves. And she had no idea how little time she truly had. The morning fog clung to Brassatine like a second skin, curling around the spires and bridges, swallowing the streets until only the hiss of steam vents hinted at life below. Ivonne stepped into it, the golden pocket watch in her satchel ticking like a nervous heartbeat. Her boots splashed through shallow puddles as she made her way toward Gearwright Square, the heart of the city's trade district. Normally, the square would be loud with hawkers calling over one another, selling everything from roasted chestnuts to gear-polished spectacles, but now the air felt wrong. People were whispering, heads tilted toward the looming great clock tower, where a faint green light pulsed behind the glass of its colossal face. "Greater than 13 chimes," one woman muttered, clutching her shawl. "Never in my life," said another. "My grandmother told stories, bad ones." Ivonne tried to listen without drawing attention, but her mind kept circling back to her father's note, "Trust no one." She reached the base of the clock tower and craned her neck upward. The gears behind the clock's face were visible even from the street. Each one should have moved in perfect unison, but now some jittered like teeth slipping on a cog. The sight made her stomach tighten. A voice rasped behind her. Greater than, dear girl. She turned to see an old man hunched against a steam pipe, his coat patched with scraps of burlap. One eye was milky white, the other sharp as a crow's. Greater than, you're Voron's daughter, he wheezed. The hour thief's got him, hasn't he? Ivonne's pulse stumbled. What did you say? The man beckoned her closer, and though every part of her remembered her father's warning, curiosity tugged her forward. Greater than, the hour thief, the old man said, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely rose above the hiss of steam. Steals hours from your life. Takes them and bottles them like fine wine. Leaves you not even knowing they're gone. Ivonne frowned. That's just a story people tell to scare children. The man's grin was all cracked teeth. Is it? Then why did the great clock strike 13 this morning? Why are the city's gears stuttering like a dying heart? The pocket watch in her satchel ticked faster, as if in agreement. Greater than, find the first gear, girl, the man said, gripping her sleeve with a surprising strength. Before he steals the city's last hour. Before she could ask another question, the old man melted into the fog, leaving only the faint smell of coal smoke. Ivonne stood still for a moment, her fingers brushing the outline of the watch through the fabric of her satchel. It felt warmer now, almost hot. She glanced up at the great clock tower once more, and nearly stumbled back. High above, on one of the tower's ledges, a dark figure stood watching her. Tall, thin, wrapped in a long coat, its face hidden beneath what looked like the polished mask of a clock. And then, just as quickly, the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished. Ivonne didn't know if she'd just met her father's enemy, but one thing was certain, her search had begun. The fog thinned as Ivonne climbed the iron-wind steps toward the sky docks. Here, at the highest edge of Brassatine, the air smelled of coal smoke and ozone, and the world above the rooftops belonged to the airship captains. Massive brass and copper vessels hovered on mooring cables, their propellers slicing the clouds into ribbons. Steam hissed from their hulls as deckhands shouted to one another over the roar of engines. The docks groaned under the weight of machines and cargo crates marked with strange stamps from places Ivonne had only seen on maps. She didn't know exactly why she'd come here, only that the figure watching her from the clock tower had made the streets below feel dangerous. If she could get above the city, maybe she could find a clue without eyes on her. Her gaze caught on a sleek skyship moored apart from the others. Its hull gleamed like polished brass, its name painted in curling letters along the side. The Gilded Hour. A young man stood on the gangway, goggles pushed up into his tousled brown hair, his long leather coat snapping in the wind. He was checking a row of pressure gauges when he noticed her watching. Greater than, you look lost, he called, his voice carrying over the hum of engines. Ivonne hesitated. I might be. Are you the captain? He flashed a grin that was far too confident for someone barely older than she was. Captain Arian Hale, at your service. Pilot, navigator, occasional smuggler of contraband tea, but don't tell the dockmaster. She didn't return the smile. I need to get to the upper district. It's urgent. Arian tilted his head. Upper district's not far by foot. But I'm guessing you're not looking for the scenic route. Ivonne glanced over her shoulder. Through the shifting steam, she swore she saw the flicker of movement, the outline of a dark coat slipping behind a stack of cargo crates. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her satchel. Arian noticed. His smile faded, replaced by something sharper. Right, you've got trouble. I can pay you, Ivonne said quickly. Not much, but, greater than, keep your coin, Arian interrupted. I'm not in the habit of leaving people to the wolves. Or clock-faced stalkers. Her eyes snapped to his. You saw him. Arian nodded toward the far end of the dock. Hard to miss. Tall, creepy, radiates the kind of bad energy that makes the engine pressure drop for no reason. Now get aboard before he decides to join us. Ivonne didn't need telling twice. She hurried up the gangway, the wooden planks creaking under her boots. The moment her feet touched the deck, Arian pulled a lever. The mooring cables rattled loose, and the Gilded Hour began to rise, lifting them above the city's rooftops. Brassatine stretched out beneath them, a maze of rooftops, smokestacks, and winding streets. Far in the distance, the great clock tower pulsed with that strange green light, like a heartbeat gone wrong. As they climbed into the open sky, Ivonne let herself breathe for the first time since the workshop's silence had woken her. But the golden watch in her satchel was still ticking faster than it should, and she knew the reprieve wouldn't last. Ariane adjusted the wheel and glanced at her. "All right, gear girl, tell me who's after you, and why you're carrying something that's making my compass spin like it's drunk." The gilded hour sliced through the clouds like a blade of brass, the wind tugging at Ivonne's hair as Ariane steered toward the upper district. From here, the city's lower streets looked like a tangle of clock springs, winding in endless loops. The great clock tower still pulsed faintly, an unsettling heartbeat against the sky. Ariane landed the ship on a discreet rooftop landing pad not far from the Grand Gearwright's Hall, an area of Brassatine where the wealthy tinkers and master engineers kept their workshops. Ivonne's father had maintained a second workspace here, one reserved for commissions from the city's most influential patrons. Few knew about it, and fewer still had the key. Ivonne had always been told it was too dangerous for her to visit alone. Now she was here without him. The heavy iron door was locked, but her father's workshop keys still hung from the leather strap in her satchel. She tried the one shaped like a gear with 7 teeth. The lock clicked open with a sigh of well-oiled hinges. Inside, the air smelled faintly of brass polish and candle wax. The walls were lined with glass-fronted cases, each containing a different clockwork marvel, a miniature dancing automaton, a self-writing quill, a birdcage with a mechanical sparrow that blinked in slow motion. But the main worktable was empty except for a single rolled parchment, sealed with a drop of crimson wax. The wax bore her father's insignia, a gear overlaid with the Roman numeral 13. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. It was a map of Brassatine, but not the one she knew. This was overlaid with a hidden network of gears and tunnels that seemed to run beneath the city. Some were marked with red ink, small symbols beside them, a spiral, a crescent, an open eye. At the very center, in bold letters, was a note. "Greater than the first gear is in the Hall of Forgotten Time." Ariane leaned over her shoulder, his goggles catching the light. "Well," he said, "that sounds inviting." Ivonne traced one of the tunnels with her finger. It ran directly beneath the Grand Gearwright's Hall, twisting down toward the old quarter, a place abandoned after the Great Fire years ago. "I've never even heard of the Hall of Forgotten Time," she murmured. Ariane shrugged. "If it's forgotten, that's probably the point." Before she could reply, a faint clatter echoed from somewhere above. They both froze. Ivonne glanced at the tall, dust-filmed window that overlooked the rooftop landing pad. 3 mechanical crows sat there now, their glassy blue eyes unblinking, their claws scraping faintly against the sill. One tilted its head, and its beak clicked open and shut, like the winding of a tiny spring. "They're not here for me," Ariane said under his breath. "I think you've got fans." Without another word, he rolled the map and shoved it back into her satchel. "We're leaving now." The streets in the old quarter were narrow, shadowed by leaning brick buildings whose windows were long ago boarded shut. Here, the sound of the city was muffled, no street hawkers, no clanging trams, only the occasional hiss of a rusted steam vent. Ivonne kept her satchel close as she followed Ariane down a side alley marked on the map. At its end stood a rusted grate large enough for a person to slip through. The lock was thick, but Ariane produced a small brass tool from his coat and worked it with practiced hands. "Greater than, you pick locks often?" she asked. "I prefer to call it creative key ownership," he said with a smirk. The grate creaked open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into the dark. They lit their lanterns and began to descend, the air growing cooler with each step. The staircase ended in a vaulted chamber so vast Ivonne's lantern barely reached the far walls. Colossal gears, each taller than a house, stood frozen in place, their teeth glinting faintly in the lantern light. "This is," Ivonne's voice caught in her throat. "It's beautiful." "Beautiful," Ariane agreed, "and dead." They walked between the gears, their footsteps echoing like whispers in a cathedral. At the center of the hall stood a pedestal, and upon it lay a gear unlike any Ivonne had ever seen, forged of silver and inlaid with tiny veins of gold that pulsed faintly with light. The first gear. But before she could reach it, a low metallic groan rolled through the chamber. From the shadows between the giant gears, a bronze automaton stepped forward. It was twice as tall as a man, its limbs jointed like a machine but moving with eerie grace. Its head was shaped like a clock face, the hands ticking slowly toward midnight. Greater than, intruder detected, it intoned, the sound like grinding steel. Trespass will not be tolerated. Arian muttered, I hate polite death machines. The automaton's chest opened, revealing a glowing core that pulsed in time with the golden veins in the first gear. Then it began to advance, each step shaking the floor. Ivonne's pulse raced. She scanned the machinery around them, looking for anything she could use. Her father had taught her long ago, every machine has a weakness. Then she saw it, a cracked tooth on the gear behind the automaton, one that connected to its movement track. Arian, the gear, she shouted. Without hesitation, Arian sprinted toward the machinery, ducking under the automaton's swinging arm. He jammed his lantern into the crack. The gear screeched as it caught, sending a shudder through the whole mechanism. The automaton staggered, its clock face spinning wildly. With a hiss of steam, it collapsed to its knees, motionless. Ivonne dashed to the pedestal, her hands trembling as she lifted the first gear. It was warm to the touch, almost alive. From somewhere deep in the hall, a faint whisper seemed to stir the air. Greater than, one restored, two remain. Her breath caught. This was bigger than she'd imagined. They left the Hall of Forgotten Time in silence, the first gear wrapped in a strip of cloth and tucked into Ivonne's satchel alongside the golden pocket watch. The climb back to the surface was slow, their lanterns flickering in the damp air. When they emerged into the alley, night had already settled over Brassatine. The gas lamps glowed with a coppery light, and the fog was heavier, curling low along the cobblestones. Arian scanned the rooftops before they stepped out. Looks clear. Ivonne wasn't so sure. The air felt, watched. They moved quickly toward the sky docks, their boots echoing in the quiet streets. Then came the faintest sound, not the ticking of her father's watch, not the hum of the city's gears, but a metallic flutter overhead. Ivonne froze. Did you hear? A shadow swooped low between the lamplights. Something landed on a wrought iron signpost ahead, its talons scraping the metal. It was a mechanical raven, its body a patchwork of blackened brass plates, its glass eyes glowing a pale blue. The beak clicked twice before it hopped closer, tilting its head as if studying her. Then, with a sharp motion, it dropped something onto the cobblestones at her feet, a small brass key, so finely made it caught the lamplight like gold. Ivonne knelt, picking it up. The key's bow was engraved with the same crest as her father's golden watch, the gear overlaid with the Roman numeral 13. Greater than, this is his, she whispered. The raven let out a short burst of ticking, almost like laughter, before launching into the air. It wheeled above them once, then darted off toward the sky docks. Arian raised an eyebrow. That's not creepy at all. It wants us to follow, Ivonne said, already stepping after it. They turned the corner toward the docks, and stopped cold. Perched along the railings and rooftops were dozens of mechanical crows, their eyes glowing in unison. At the center of the dock, a tall figure stood with his back to them, coattails snapping in the wind. Slowly, he turned. His face was hidden behind a polished mask shaped like a clock, the hands ticking slowly toward midnight. The hour thief. Even at a distance, Ivonne felt the pull, as if time itself wanted to slip from her grasp. The golden watch in her satchel ticked frantically. The masked figure tilted his head slightly. When he spoke, the words were smooth, almost courteous, but beneath them was the weight of something ancient. Greater than, Voron's daughter. You've found the first gear. That's unfortunate for both of us. Ivonne Voron had followed the raven's trail deep into the underbelly of the city, past dripping tunnels, forgotten gear vaults, and chambers where old clock faces stared down from the walls like ancient, silent gods. Her boots crunched on shards of glass and metal as she reached a dim chamber lit only by a single, flickering lantern. The air smelled of rust and old paper. At the center of the room sat a man draped in tattered velvet, his coat patched with mismatched brass buttons, each ticking faintly as though holding a heartbeat of its own. His hair was streaked silver, his eyes sharp as broken clock hands. On the table before him lay a small black box with a lock shaped like an hourglass. You've come far, Clockmaker's daughter, he said without looking up. And too soon for your own good. Ivonne stepped forward, tightening her grip on the bag slung over her shoulder. You're the hour thief. He smiled, a thin, cold curl of lips. Titles are given by the desperate. I don't steal hours, I buy them. From those willing to part with their own. Her heart pounded. She had heard of him in whispers, a shadowy broker who traded in time itself, giving minutes, days, or years in exchange for debts no one could ever fully repay. I need information, Ivonne said. My father is missing. Someone's been turning time against the city. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned back, chair creaking. I can tell you who has him. I can tell you where the trail leads. But you must give me something in return. I have nothing to trade. Oh, you do, the hour thief replied, tapping his temple. Your future. 1 hour of it. Not now, but taken from a moment when you'll need it most. Ivonne's breath caught. To lose an hour was dangerous enough, but to lose it at a critical moment could mean disaster. Why would I agree to that? He leaned forward, his voice low. Because the man who took your father has the means to break the clocks of the entire world. And you'll never reach him in time without me. The room seemed to pulse with the slow, heavy beat of a massive unseen clock. She felt the weight of her choice pressing down. One wrong move and everything could unravel. I'll give you half an hour, she said at last. The hour thief laughed softly. You bargain well, Ivonne Voren. But half an hour won't buy you my secrets. The full hour, or we part here. Ivonne's fists tightened, then, slowly, she nodded. 1 hour. But you'll tell me everything you know. They shook hands, and as his fingers closed around hers, she felt something slip from her. A tug, deep and cold, like the moment before waking from a dream. It's done, he said, releasing her. Your father is being held in the glass citadel, and the one behind it calls herself Lady Inkwell. You'll find the first key in the hands of a man with no shadow. Before Ivonne could ask more, the lantern flickered, and the hour thief was gone, the black box still ticking faintly on the table. She stepped into the dark tunnels once more, the stolen hour a ghost at her back. The alleys of gears reached twisted like the inside of a giant clock, each corner ticking toward some unknown destination. Ivonne followed the directions from the hour thief, clutching the scrap of parchment with coordinates and a curious sketch, a man standing beneath a shattered moon. The city grew quieter as she moved deeper, the steam pipes no longer hissing, the air strangely still. Gas lamps flickered and dimmed until only the pale glow of the mechanical moon above lit her way. That was when she saw him. He stood at the end of the street, tall and thin, wearing a long coat lined with silver thread. His hat cast his face in shadow, but it wasn't his face that made Ivonne's breath catch, it was the ground at his feet. There was no shadow, none at all. You've been expected, Clockmaker's daughter, he said, his voice a mixture of silk and steel. I'm looking for my father, Ivonne replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. And I'm told you have something that can help me. He stepped closer, his boots making no sound on the cobblestones. I have something, yes. But everything in this city has a price. From his coat, he drew a strange object, a compass made of black glass, its needle spinning wildly before stopping and pointing upward toward the mechanical moon. This will take you to the place where your father's trail ends, he said. But in exchange, I will need an hour of your life. Ivonne's eyes narrowed. An hour. Not just any hour, the man continued. Your happiest hour. I will take it from your past, and you will never remember it. But without this compass, you will wander until your time winds down entirely. Her heart thudded. An hour of happiness, was it worth losing a piece of herself to save her father? She thought of the ticking key in her pocket, of her father's smile, of the unfinished clocks in the workshop. She swallowed hard. You have a deal, she said. The man smiled, a slow, unsettling curve of his lips. He reached out, touched her temple lightly, and a warm, golden thread of memory slipped from her mind into his palm. He tucked it away in a pocket, then handed her the black glass compass. Follow where it points. And remember, I will see you again when your time runs out. As she turned to leave, Ivonne risked one last glance over her shoulder. The street was empty. And the man with no shadow was gone. The tower between seconds stood at the city's edge, shrouded in a perpetual twilight that never belonged to morning nor night. Its brass walls caught faint glimmers from lanterns far below, yet the light never seemed to truly touch it. Each tier of the tower turned slowly, as if giant unseen gears deep beneath the cobblestones wound the structure in silence. Ivonne stood at its gates, the clockmaker's map glowing faintly in her hand. Every brass line and etched gear on the parchment pulsed in time with her heartbeat, guiding her to the final step. She could feel her father's presence, faint, but real, somewhere inside. Beside her, Ashwin adjusted his copper-lensed goggles, scanning the entrance. "This is where time is knotted," he said quietly. "Step wrong, and we could live the same second over and over forever." Above them, the raven with the silver key circled once before landing on Ivonne's shoulder. Its cold, metallic beak clicked, and it whispered in a voice like rusted bells, "The shadowless one waits." But not alone. Ivonne took a breath and stepped through the gates. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, and still. Great pendulums swung in slow arcs above their heads, but each was caught in a strange stutter, pausing, then jumping forward, as though reality itself hiccuped. Brass staircases spiraled upward into a haze, each step engraved with markings from languages long lost. On the third landing, they saw them, figures trapped mid-stride, mid-breath, mid-blink. An old woman with a basket of flowers was frozen in place, petals suspended like glass in the air. A child's wooden hoop hung motionless in mid-roll. Time here was fractured, and they were walking through its shards. As they climbed higher, the ticking grew louder, but not in unison. Dozens of clocks hidden within the walls ticked at different speeds, clashing and grinding like a mechanical storm. Ashwin frowned. "It's all wrong. If the wrong gear catches, time for the entire city could collapse." They reached the summit, and there he was. The man with no shadow stood before a massive clock face made of crystal, each hand longer than a lamppost. His coat of black leather shimmered faintly, stitched with thin brass lines like veins of gold. Behind him, chains of light held her father, the clockmaker, bound within the center of the clock's gears. "Ivonne," the man said, his voice calm and smooth, as if every word had been rehearsed for centuries. "You've done well to reach me. But every tick of this clock is a second I control. If you want your father, and the city, to have a future, you must give me something in return." Ivonne tightened her grip on the clockmaker's map. "And what would that be?" He smiled, a slow, cold curve. "Your next minute." The room seemed to tilt as she realized what he meant. A minute wasn't just time, it was choice. It was a heartbeat, a thought, a decision she hadn't yet made. To give it up meant surrendering a piece of her destiny, perhaps forever. The ticking grew louder. Behind her, Ashwin's hand hovered near his pocket watch. The raven's wings twitched, and Ivonne realized that the true bargain had not yet been struck. The tower between seconds trembled around Ivonne, the gears grinding as if the very fabric of time was straining to hold itself together. The floor beneath her boots tilted slightly, and the golden light of the clockmaker's map pulsed in her hands, its symbols rearranging themselves into the shape of a winding key. Across the chamber, the man with no shadow staggered, clutching his chest as if the absence of his own shadow was tearing him apart. The hour thief had vanished into the machinery's upper catwalks, her voice echoing faintly like a fading chime. The raven, its key still gleaming in its beak, swooped down toward Ivonne and dropped it into her palm. The key was warm, almost alive. The great clock at the heart of the tower, an immense lattice of brass teeth and ruby-eyed pivots, had stopped. The seconds hung motionless in the air, tiny droplets of suspended moments shimmering all around her. She knew what she had to do. "Ivonne," a deep voice resonated from everywhere at once. It was her father's, faint but steady. "Wind it, and remember, child, time is not yours to own, only to guide." Her throat tightened, but her hands moved with certainty. She stepped forward and fit the key into the winding core, a pillar of gold and silver with an aperture like the heart of a music box. As she turned it, the machinery shuddered, then began to move in perfect synchrony. Tick, tock, tick, each rotation brought motion back into the world. Frozen droplets of rain outside the tower resumed their fall. Somewhere in the city, A steam carriage's whistle blew. A baby took its first breath. But with each turn, Ivonne felt a piece of her own heartbeat synchronize with the great clock, as if she were becoming part of it. When the final click sounded, the tower exhaled, and her father stepped from the shadows. He looked older, worn by years stolen and returned in seconds, but his eyes were bright. "You did it," he whispered. Ivonne embraced him tightly, but as they stood there, she noticed her pocket watch, the one her father had made for her, was no longer ticking. Instead, its face showed a single word. Guide. She realized then that she had been chosen not to rule time, but to protect its balance. Her adventures weren't over. They had only just begun. And as the tower's bells rang a melody no one had heard in centuries, Ivonne Voren, the clockmaker's daughter, stepped into a new second, one that belonged to the world. For more motivation stories, please like, share and subscribe this channel. Thanks and God bless.